Muy buenos días, autoridades presentes, señoras y señores, tengan todos unos muy buenos días. Les damos la más cordial bienvenida a esta conferencia internacional Resiliencia del Patrimonio ante Incendios en Tiempos de Cambio Climático, organizada por la Oficina Regional de la UNESCO para América Latina y el Caribe, en colaboración con el Ministerio de las Culturas, las Artes y el Patrimonio de Chile. Esta instancia cuenta además con el apoyo de la Corporación Municipal, Sitio de Patrimonio Mundial de Valparaíso y el Parque Cultural de Valparaíso. Saludamos a las autoridades que nos acompañan esta mañana. Señora Esther Kish-Laroche, directora de la Oficina Regional de la UNESCO para América Latina y el Caribe. Señor Juan Carlos Field, presidente de la Organización de Bomberos Americanos. Señora Carolina Pérez Dattari, subsecretaria de Patrimonio Cultural. Señora Yanina Figueroa, presidenta del directorio del Parque Cultural de Valparaíso. Señora Macarena Carroza Solar, directora ejecutiva de la Corporación Municipal que administra el Sitio de Patrimonio Mundial de Valparaíso. En los últimos años se ha observado un aumento en la frecuencia e intensidad de los incendios. La vulnerabilidad del patrimonio frente al fuego está cada vez más en el foco de atención, generando alarma ante la pérdida irreversible de sitios culturales, de biodiversidad y también de conocimientos tradicionales, ancestrales. Al mismo tiempo, la cultura también puede desempeñar un papel fundamental en la mitigación de los riesgos de incendio y en la construcción de resiliencia. Y esto nos lleva a organizar esta conferencia durante 2 días que va a reunir a expertos internacionales, administradores de sitios patrimoniales y actores clave para el patrimonio de América Latina y el Caribe, con el objetivo de intercambiar experiencias y también mejores prácticas en el manejo de los riesgos y de los incendios, estos en tiempos de cambio climático. Este evento va a marcar además el lanzamiento de la primera publicación global de su tipo, la Guía de Gestión del Riesgo de Incendios para el Patrimonio Cultural y Natural. Por último, como parte de esta instancia, entre los días 13 y 15 de noviembre se realizará una capacitación centrada en el uso e implementación de la guía de la UNESCO para la gestión del riesgo de incendios en el patrimonio cultural y natural, que proporcionará herramientas prácticas para la mitigación y respuesta ante incendios en sitios patrimoniales. Por último, les recordamos que esta conferencia está siendo transmitida en vivo a través del canal de YouTube de UNESCO Santiago y que su grabación quedará alojada en ese mismo canal para que la puedan revisar posteriormente. Finalmente, agradecemos al Parque Cultural de Valparaíso por ser la casa de esta instancia. Y para comenzar con esta conferencia, vamos a dar paso a la ceremonia de apertura y lanzamiento de la guía de la UNESCO sobre el manejo del fuego. A continuación, vamos a dar paso a un mensaje en video de Ernesto Otone, subdirector general de Cultura de UNESCO.
Estimados amigos, hoy nos reunimos en la
threat of fires for cultural and natural heritage, a threat that has been intensified by accelerated climate change. Over the last years, we have been witnesses in the entire world of how fires can devastate landscapes, communities, threaten biodiversity, and erase irreplaceable cultural milestones for UNESCO. And in fact, for all of us here, this is an urgent call to action, a call that leads us to explore all ways to strengthen resilience and protect our shared heritage. In response, UNESCO has developed the Fire Risk Management Guide, which is a vital tool to strengthen capacities for professionals working on heritage, but also for policymakers, community leaders, and emergency response teams. The guide offers principles, methodologies, processes to reduce the risks of fires in sites and heritage structures. However, we must remember that heritage is not only vulnerable by nature, it also has a great potential as a resource for the so-called resilience. Specifically, indigenous communities have applied traditional practices to manage fires and sustain ecosystems. This knowledge is vital in any type of effective strategy for fire risk management, and the guide makes an effort to include and support these practices that have been proven for centuries now. I am delighted to know how countries in the region of Latin America and the Caribbean have acknowledged the importance of this work. World Heritage Sites of Valparaíso and Parque Nacional Los Alerces in Argentina are leading the path by adopting the UNESCO Guide as a vital pillar to build resilience for fire. In the next days after the conference, there will be a 3-day training course for approximately 30 professionals of the region. Based on these best practices, UNESCO will redouble its efforts worldwide to support our member states and the different stakeholders involved in the adaptation of the fire guide in their specific regional and national contexts. Safeguarding heritage and leveraging it for building resilience given the climate change are in the heart of UNESCO's mandate. Only 2 months ago, the Ministers of Culture of G7 adopted the Naples Declaration that strengthens the resilience of cultural change with climate change. And the upcoming G20 summit of Brazil, this will continue with an additional emphasis on integrating culture in climate action strategies and in the reduction of disaster risk. This conference is clearly a testimony of UNESCO's commitment to this vital cause. I wish to express my sincere thanks to the Minister of Culture, Arts, and Heritage, Carolina Arredondo, and the Chilean government. Today's conference would have not been possible without their unwavering support and deep commitment to the protection and promotion of heritage, especially against risks of disaster and climate change. I would also like to thank the donors of the Heritage Emergency Funds for their support in making this fire guide possible. UNESCO looks forward to collaborating closely with all of you to ensure that our heritage remains resilient, protected, and as a source of strength for the generations to come. Thank you very much. We would like to thank Ernesto Tone for his message, and now we will leave the floor to Esther Kish-Laroche, Director of the UNESCO Office for Latin America and the Caribbean. Dear Carolina Perez-Tataris, Undersecretary of Cultural Heritage, dear authorities here present, dear colleagues, dear friends, good morning to all of you.
I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to all of our international participants as well. Thank you so much for being here. I know that some of you traveled from far to come to Chile. So welcome to Valparaíso, and we look forward to hearing your experiences. It
is a true honor for me to start this important conference here in Valparaíso, which is an emblematic city and a World Heritage Site of UNESCO. It is a live example of the wealth and cultural diversity that we try to protect and celebrate all over the world. I would like to thank the effort and the commitment of all the institutions that collaborated with us and that made this event possible. The Ministry of Cultures, Art, and Heritage of Chile, the municipal corporation that administers the World Heritage Site in Valparaíso, and Parque Cultural de Valparaíso, who is hosting us today. Thank you very much for all your support. The collaboration of these organizations and their teams and all the people that traveled to be here today is vital to move forward strongly in a common task, protecting and preserving our invaluable cultural and natural heritage in a context of risks that is increasing. As our Deputy Director of Culture, Ernesto Tone, mentioned, this event will also mark the launching of the Fire Management Guide of UNESCO. As UNESCO, we are strongly committed in supporting our member states and all the people that manage, protect, and preserve cultural and natural heritage, providing a practical and specific tool to allow them to strengthen their actions with fires, considering each stage of emergency from preparation, response to recovery. Along these 2 days, we will explore fundamental topics to face the challenge of resilience of cultural and natural heritage in times of climate change. In this sense, I would like to invite you to stop and reflect after each session on the scope of the topics addressed and their implication, not only for those of us that work in preserving heritage, but for the entire society and the legacy that we will leave to future generations. In this conference, we are asking ourselves an important question. How can natural and cultural heritage strengthen our capacity of resistance given these extreme events? And our heritage sites are vulnerable and they're often exposed to increasing climate change that increase the risk of deterioration, but we also find symbolic and historical and practical resources that can help us face those challenges. We consider vital to reflect on the potential of heritage, to remind us of our relationship with nature and how we can get inspiration in sustainable and innovative solutions. This event also wants to create a dialogue, an exchange, and a review of our procedures and practices with emergency situations. Many of us here present today have experienced emergency situations that have affected people or some site of cultural heritage, a natural reserve, a museum, or any kind of historical building, and we know that consequences are devastating. As UNESCO, we strongly believe that we must be capable of creating learning experiences after each disaster and how we can improve our capacity to act in these critical circumstances. We will also talk about a key issue today, both in risk management and in the mitigation and prevention of fires that has to do with the inclusion of local communities and indigenous knowledge. Our invitation is to think about risk management plans and emergency plans that involve communities actively, as we did it from UNESCO, thanks to the funding of the Emergency Fund last year in Parque Nacional Rapa Nui, in cooperation with the Maohenua indigenous community, and how we're doing it today together with the municipal corporation that manages the Valparaíso Heritage Site. The production of cultural and natural heritage, the preservation of biodiversity, and the safeguard of cultural and material heritage are not the responsibility of a few people. It is the responsibility that we all have. Along these 2 days, I would like to invite each and every one of you to actively participate in this dialogue instance as with your critical and committed voice in this mission of resilience and protection. Let's have each intervention and reflection approach us closer to our common goal and protect our heritage for future generations. Thank you very much, and I would like to wish you a very fruitful day. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, directora. A
Thank you,
continuación,
Director.
pronunciará
Now
unas
we
palabras
will be
de
addressed
bienvenida la subsecretaria
by
del
the
Patrimonio
Undersecretary
Cultural,
for Cultural
Carolina Pérez
Heritage,
Datari.
Carolina Pérez Natali.
¿Qué tal? Buenos días.
Good morning.
Muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos
And
hoy.
thank you very
Quería
much
partir
for being with us
agradeciendo
today. I'd like to
especialmente
begin
a
by
todos nuestros
especially
invitados
thanking all of our
internacionales, invitadas
international
internacionales,
guests
porque
because how valuable it is for us to be here today, sharing experiences regarding the protection of our heritage at an international level. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for traveling. Journeys can be tiring, so I hope you may also rest at the end of this first day. And of course, I would like to also thank all authorities for being here. Ernesto Tone, former minister of our country, thank you for your greetings today. Deputy General Assistant for Culture at UNESCO, and Esther Quish, Director, UNESCO Regional Office for Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you very much for your work by UNESCO in this country, and I would especially like to thank you for the work that we've had in recent years. You mentioned Ojenua regarding fire. We did have a very dramatic fire in Tonaracu. I'm sure you recall, and the work we were able to do there together with the regional UNESCO office was essential. So thank you very much. Today, we move ahead in the work done from here, the port city, which is a World Heritage, a very important place for our country, that speaks to us also of the history of industrialization in the 19th century, not only in Chile but the world, a port that was fundamental for trade and cultural exchange around the world. And so we're happy to welcome you here at this World Heritage place, where we have in recent years made great efforts to protect, care for, and project, hopefully for the coming 20 years, because recently we held our anniversary since the announcement in 2003. And it is also important to speak at this international conference, where we will address important talks regarding fire risk to our heritage and how to face recovery after disasters. I think it is particularly important to speak of the concept of resilience, as was mentioned, the community participation in the prevention of fire, universities, both public and private, trade. We also were in a World Heritage Site with much trade in an urban setting, so there are very important challenges, and how the community can get together to prevent these risks, especially linked to climate change, which is something that is happening and that presents us with many challenges as humanity. And perhaps one of the most relevant has to do with the protection of the community as such, and community is very often linked to heritage sites. At the Minister of Culture, and we believe that it is very important to activate this emergency fund for heritage through the UNESCO office in Santiago and the holding of this conference. The reflections that we will share here, the guidelines that will be presented later on, fills us with joy, and we hope these technical and strategic inputs may contribute a very important amount of knowledge, experience, and training for all institutions who collaborate and have important duties in this sense, together with other territories regarding the risk of heritage structures in the case of emergencies, fires, and making the most of this valuable opportunity to have top-level experts gathered here today in the city of Valparaiso. I'd like to take this moment to recognize the very important task done by the Municipal Corporation for the Administration of World Heritage Site in Valparaiso. This is a corporation born in 2023, and it cost us a great effort. And as I told the regional director, it is very relevant to our country. We have World Heritage Management in Chile that is very diverse, and so we have different types of governance. I would dare say that the governance we've set up in this World Heritage Site, Valparaiso, is of the forefront in our country in terms of including on the same table. We have a board, including the Ministry of Culture, Arts and Heritage. We have the municipality, also the neighborhood associations that live within the protected area. We have the public and private universities, and also the representatives representatives of local trade. And so we have, little by little, over the last 2 years, connecting the work, supposed to work above all with the communities and fire prevention, but also other types of risks that we have identified in sites such as this one. This is very important. And I hope that we may also move ahead in Chile and the region, I would dare say, with regard to governance, to recognize our heritage, value them, and allow the community realize that when we speak of protecting the heritage, we mean local development, but also country and regional development. And I would like to end by speaking of 2 topics that are very relevant for this management. The first has to do with the budget. We are a country that has been clear in saying that we're in debt regarding the government investment in cultural heritage. We last year increased by 400% the subsidy provided by the government to various organizations responsible for these World Heritage sites. And right now, we're discussing the budget. And so those of us who are part of the government, this is very relevant because it allows us to project the work that we can do together with the community. And I wanted to say this on this occasion because for us to work on that is essential. In terms of management, I would also like to congratulate the fact that in Chile this year, for the first time, we put together a network of World Heritage sites and where we will be able to work in terms of governance and, of course, Lugusian unified and among those who are responsible for these sites together with the state of Chile. And also add that we quite recently, on October 15th, filed the indications for the new heritage management. There are many things to say there, but the 2 that have most to do with World Heritage sites in particular are the fact that for the first time we will in Chile be discussing legislation that appropriates the conventions ratified by the state of Chile before UNESCO. Material, another convention on the world sites and illegal trafficking. All of this is a tremendous challenge for our country and requires us international standards after a very long time. And so I would like to say that I hope that this discussion will be very fruitful in the legislative, and I hope that we do well. Rather than having to do with a particular government, this has to do with the need in the country. This is something that we see very anxiously. And second, I believe it is also important to say that this is a bill that will allow us to better manage the heritage. Because, for example, when we speak of interventions in heritage sites, how can we work speedily so that people who live there may live better and do not feel this as an additional burden? Or different protected polygons in terms of heritage. And that also this aggravates fires. I wanted to say this because when heritage takes fire anywhere in the world, the entire community suffers. And we wonder, why did we not do something before? When we face instances such as this, we're able to say that we are preparing somehow to take responsibility for this sort of hazard that means that not only does the community suffer, but the entire country. And when we are speaking of World Heritage sites, I always remember Mauro Rossi from UNESCO, who said that when a World Heritage site is damaged, it's not the community that suffers, not just the country, but the entire world. Humanity suffers. And I think that that is the challenge that we face when we, as a state, must work in relation to these sites. We are the custodians. That is part of not only our history as a country, a community, but also the history of humanity. And that is what we are protecting, that is what we are caring for, and that is why I wanted to reiterate my thanks to everyone who is here today and take the opportunity to make the most of this conversation. I believe that it does us a lot of good for those of us who work in the heritage area to share experiences, to grow together, to address collective challenges, and undoubtedly the work that we've done together with UNESCO brings us closer to that. So thank you very much, and I hope these days may be very fruitful. We thank the Undersecretary for her words, and now we invite Juan Carlos Field to come forward, who is president of the American Firefighters Organization. Good morning, everyone. Authorities, Undersecretary, Director, Regional Director of UNESCO, guests, attendants. I would like to invite all of you and wish you a good morning and say that as a member of OBA, the American Firefighters Organization. This is the organization of American firefighters, and also I am a firefighter of Chile, and I would like to thank all institutions that are present here. This under heritage in times of climate change. OBA is an organization that is regional and brings together firefighters from Latin America and the Caribbean, founded more than 17 years ago in order to promote cooperation among firefighter organizations. It works to increase capacities at the institutions in the region by means of information and development programs. Over the years, OBA has built a very sound network that to date brings together more than 8,000 firefighters from 14 countries and 61 institutions. Our commitment is clear: to ensure all firefighter organizations in the continent may have excellent training, updated technology, and high work standards, so that our firefighters may efficiently and safely address the requirements of the community, reducing the risk of disasters. OBA, its mission is to further institutional cooperation among firefighter organizations of the continent. We work side by side with firefighters, governments, international agencies to generate and share knowledge, experience, and projects that strengthen local development based on collective cooperation, which is what brings us here together today. In Latin America and the Caribbean, fires have had tremendous, devastating impact, not only on cultural heritage and our collective identity, but also the environment and resources. In all cases, firefighters have been key players in terms of emergency response as well as prevention. And at OBA, we understand the challenges and the responsibilities that the protection of our cultural and natural heritage implies, feeling that the weaknesses of many of our communities, especially those living closer to sites of high heritage value, increases in the shortcomings of long-term response. We need to be able to appraise the risk of fires and the various factors that are part of the emergency, and we need to care for these sites. We have a role in how to improve our response and adapt new strategies for the protection of heritage within the context of climate change. This is an excellent occasion to assess the increasing impacts of fire on heritage sites and the need to create awareness on the risks we face. And we can identify the challenges of voids in prevention and prevent the spreading of fires for this tangible heritage. Interaction between ministries of culture, emergency and environment, exchange good practices and lessons learned in order to generate protocols and action plans, each time more advanced and efficient. As firefighters in the Americas, we strengthen our commitment with the protection of heritage in a proactive manner, accompanying the initiatives that contribute to safeguard what is ours. Space for exchange, such as this conference, and as the UNESCO guideline for the prevention of risk of cultural and natural heritages is essential in order to strengthen our capacities and protect cultural and natural heritage before the disasters caused by fire. Having done pilots to implement the guideline, we double our commitment to the proposal and new lines of work that may come about.
The American Organization of Firefighter is the representative voice of the firefighters of the region, is committed to promoting the institutional link and the ongoing contact with other stakeholders of the sector to accompany constant dialogue between all those involved and build the development of the necessary policies to improve fire risk management. At the end of this conference, I hope we can be able to identify priorities and specific actions for Latin America and the Caribbean to reduce the risk of fires and strengthen resilience of our communities. I would like to conclude by reaffirming the commitment of the American Organization of Firefighters, OBA, with this cause. We know that the future of our heritage depends on collective cooperation. Firefighters want to make prevention and fire response a vital axis in heritage management. Climate change is not only a threat, but also an urgent call to action. At the end of this event, I hope we can advance with a renewed vision on how to build collectively a safer future for our heritage, our communities, and of course, for the upcoming generations. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Juan Carlos, for your message. And now it is time for the presentation of the risk management guide, fire management guide that will be presented by Christopher Guyon, risk management specialist, president of International Committee of Risk Preparedness. The floor is yours. Thank you very much. Good morning.
Distinguished representatives, members of UNESCO, honored guests, including from the various ministries of culture, numerous World Heritage sites, and cultural and natural sites, and the various emergency responders and agencies that are here today. It is a privilege to be here with you. I'm deeply honored to be here to address this esteemed gathering on the central issue of protecting our world's cultural heritage. Sites from the devastating and the increasing number and threat from fires that we continue to see. The preservation of these irreplaceable treasures requires our immediate attention and collaborative action, as we have noted already this morning. And through the release of UNESCO's Fire Risk Management Guide today, will play a critical role in our helping to more effectively protect our treasures and what matters most to us. And I look forward to being with you and facing both the challenges that we are encountering, but also the solutions and moving forward to address those and reducing the risks related to fire and helping to protect our cultural and natural heritage. So thank you. So in starting out, I wanted to give a little bit of background in terms of the guide and how this was developed and the intention behind it and how it is very different from a lot of the other guides that are out there. So I thought, starting out, we just talk a little bit about the fire problem that we already know. We see, as we know, just even here in Chile, a lot of fires happening to our cultural and natural heritage. Just a few weeks ago, the San Francisco Church in Iquique burned down due to fire. We've had a lot of fires in museums and sacred sites throughout Chile. We've also had, as we all well know, a lot of fires in our natural heritage here. This isn't only limited to Chile, as we know. We've seen fires internationally from the National Museum in Brazil that impacted not only the historic building, but a collection of over 20 million artifacts of things that are irreplaceable, indigenous languages that are no longer spoken, for instance, that we will never hear again. These are lost forever when we encounter fires. We've had the fire at the Milot Church in Haiti. We've also had the fire in Manila at a central post office recently, and as we all are well aware, the fire at Notre Dame. It's not just buildings and museums and sacred sites that we're losing to fire, it's a lot of other aspects of our cultural heritage, from historic bridges such as the Kapelbrook Bridge in Switzerland to Namdaemun Gate in South Korea, which is Korea's #1 treasure and entrance to the city. We have the Cutty Sark in London. Again, not a physical building and so forth, but it is part of our built heritage. And we continue to have devastating fires, as we have seen an increasing frequency and severity and duration of our wildland fires. So as noted before, why do these fires happen and what can we do about them, I think are really the questions I'd like to ask and answer over the course of the next few minutes. And I think in developing a guide, I really think we need to understand what the real problems are, both in terms of technical, but overall in terms of the implementation of the guide and helping it to be successful. So what I wanted to just take a few minutes to just talk a little bit about why do these fires continue and why do they continue to be so devastating? So I've been doing this for a few years, and just every time that I see a fire has been happening, I begin to try to dig a little bit deeper. So it's not just a fire at Notre Dame, it's not just a fire at San Francisco Church, but what actually happened, what caused it, and what allowed it to become so devastating. And it's very, very interesting, and there's a lot that we can learn, and I just wanted to talk through 2 case studies briefly. We're probably all well aware of the fire at Windsor Castle back in 1992. It started with a halogen lamp up against the tapestry. There were people standing right there. The fire raced up the wall into what we called a concealed combustible space. It was very difficult to get access to, but it was very combustible, and the flames raced through there. We have people that are detecting the fire early on. We also have a fire brigade at Windsor Palace. So we have a lot of things in place. We're seeing the fire happening. But even then, the fire, because of where it was, because there was no automatic sprinklers, it was very difficult to get to. The fire was able to spread through 100 rooms throughout the palace there. It took 15 hours. It took 250 firefighters and 6 million liters of water that were poured on this fire in order to put it out. Some of the lessons that can be learned are that we had a lot of combustible materials, a lot of ignition sources, very little compartmentation to slow the spread of fire around. These were some of the contributing factors at Windsor Castle. One of the other areas that we see at times when our natural heritage and our cultural heritage is lost is that there's restoration and construction work going on, such as at Notre Dame. This is a very, very vulnerable period, and I just wanted to talk through briefly why. This is La Fenice in Venice that had a fire back in 1996. Construction work was going on. The contractors were a little bit behind on schedule, so there were apparently these small fires that were set so that they weren't getting blamed and fined in terms of what was happening. One of these fires, unfortunately, got a little bit out of hand and grew bigger than what it was expected. But let's look at the fire protection systems. The sprinkler system was being renovated, the fire alarm was being renovated and not working. The doors providing compartmentation were being taken off site and being refurbished. We're in Venice. There's no fire trucks. There's fire boats that need to come when there is a fire. Unfortunately, at this time, with the work going on with the restoration, they were also cleaning the canals in the adjacent vicinity of La Fenice, which meant it was very difficult for the firefighters to gain access. So these are oftentimes kind of perfect storms. It's not one thing happening, but there's a series of things in terms of no detection and no suppression and no compartmentation that oftentimes leads to these devastating fires. So in looking at this and what are the things that we can learn in terms of how do we move forward in addressing these, a few things. One, numerous ignition sources are present, which means we can have the potential for fire. There's a lot of combustible material, which means we have fuel that can burn quickly and for long periods of time. We often have limited or no smoke detection or fire detection systems and alarm systems, which mean it's delayed in terms of the people we notify in the buildings and delayed to the notification of the emergency responders. There's often limited or no automatic suppression systems such as sprinklers to help contain the fire. There's often no compartmentation to help slow the spread so that the emergency responders can help limit the size and the speed of how the fire spreads. And there's often limited if any, plans in place in terms of how do we go about, as we had talked briefly, the preparedness, the response, and the recovery side. There's very little forethought to this. So again, probably a lot of common sense, a lot of things that we may think, well, of course that's happening. But time and time again, we continue to see these issues. We talked briefly before about restoration and construction. It's amazing to start looking at the buildings that we have lost due to this, and a lot of very prominent ones. And again, looking at a lot of these, and the common thread there is during construction and restoration work that was going on that was a cause of those. And why? What is different from the normal day-to-day, and why do we need to address things a little bit differently when we do have restoration and construction work going on? During this period, we introduced new ignition sources than what are normally there. They're often temporary. So we have temporary, very bright, very hot lights. We have temporary electrical work, drawing a lot of high power for equipment. We have removed the doors. We oftentimes have negated or repairing fire alarm systems, sprinkler systems, and so forth. We put up security fencing, which makes it very, very difficult for the fire department to get in. There's a lot of things that are not in place, and it could be for weeks, it could be for months, it could be for a year, but it's a significant period that we often don't really take into consideration in developing fire risk management plans. So just a little bit of why things are happening, and now what do we do in terms of going forward and trying to be effective in implementing a fire risk management plan. So one of the things, there's a lot of different guides and parts of guides that are out there. But in developing this with UNESCO over the last couple of years, coming to realize that just putting something in place to have it that hopefully somebody picks up and reads is solving part of the problem. But I think some of the other things that were noted is we need to create awareness, like what is happening here this week, both over the next couple of days and the training session. There's a lot that we could do to create awareness around fires and why they happen and what can be done. I think also, and it's fantastic to see the chief here in terms of getting emergency responders engaged in this process and not just waiting for them should a fire happen, for them to first see the building. But I think it's so important that we understand as a community the challenges, the opportunities, the capabilities, and engage them in the process. I think engaging communities, as was discussed earlier, and looking at traditional and indigenous knowledge is such an important thing to making these plans long-term sustainable and engaging the community who are going to be caring for these. And last but not least, it's coming down to having an overall plan that's based on risk, that's sustainable, easily implementable, cost-effective. So I want to talk about each of these briefly, but I think it's not just having the guide in place and that we have that, it's also about the overall implementation and how we look at that and addressing these 4 items. In terms of creating awareness, I think one of the things, and it's very, very interesting, we deal with a lot of different types of disasters. Fire is one of those disasters that we can actually do something about. We can reduce the frequency of fires happening, we can reduce the intensity, we can actually impact the duration of these fires, as opposed to earthquakes and floods and tornadoes and so forth. We do have the capability to do that, fortunately. We need to involve and create more awareness amongst everybody, the community, the owners, the site managers, the contractors that are on site, the architects and engineers and conservators. We're all in this together. We all have input that is very critical in terms of having a successful plan that we need to engage. And as we talked about, we need a strategy for every day of what is happening, but also during the restoration and construction period. And in terms of how is having a plan, but addressing what was mentioned before in terms of the risk reduction, in terms of preparedness while we're waiting potentially for something to happen, in terms of addressing emergency response, and then the recovery period afterwards. And that is what is going to help us to be successful. In terms of understanding emergency responders briefly, and I don't mean to take anything away from the chief, there is a lot of things that need to go into, what emergency responders do amazingly well at the end of the day. But there's so many little bits and pieces that contribute to the successful operation and outcomes, from that they face every day with these. The delayed notification, which means the fire is going to continue to grow while they're trying to respond to the site. How do they get there? What is the weather? What is the traffic like? Does that take a certain amount of time? Can they get into the site? Are the gates and surroundings wide enough for their vehicles to get there? What do they have in terms of equipment for themselves, as well as just the trucks and the ladders and water resources, both that they're bringing to the site and what is available on site? Can they get into the building? Can they get to the upper floors in a protected, safe way that we're not putting them at harm? How big is that fire by the time we finally notify them and they arrive? And is there sufficient water? There's many things that go into this, but it's so important to engage them and to understand these and how they may impact us and how we can improve upon them on our sites, and work with them and engage and understand them further, that are so important. And just briefly to get into a little bit about fire and physics and how critical the time component is to all of this. A lot of firefighting, a lot of it is physics and putting out fires, that we have so much heat and we need so much water. And once we surpass this, how much water can be put on a fire by a local community at times, if the fire goes beyond that, it is very, very difficult and challenging to put out, as you can see, once we get past a certain size limit. So again, going back to the importance of time and looking at how quickly we can let them know and how quickly they can get there and how quickly they can start putting water on the fire is going to help our chances of success and not having total devastating fires to our structures and our sites. We talked a little bit before briefly about engaging communities and traditional knowledge and how so important this is to having a plan that's going to be successfully implemented, but also going to be long-term sustainable in engaging them. So again, in terms of creating awareness, in terms of implementing fire prevention plans and the communication that goes on within the community or even during an event such as wildland fires, and how do you communicate and notify people and let them know they need to be responding. Bringing in intergenerational knowledge and what's been learned in the past is tremendous. And we've probably seen with all of these wildland fires, we're going back centuries of the knowledge, traditional knowledge of the pre-burning, what was outlawed, at least in the United States, 150 years ago. We're now going back and revisiting that these pre-burns that they knew about, this indigenous and traditional knowledge, how important it was to trying to limit wildfires. But there's a lot of other cases like that that we can go back and learn a tremendous amount from, that's so important to engage the communities. So the last part of this is just looking at our overall fire risk management plan. And you may have seen this, and it was mentioned earlier as well too, but there is a process in terms of looking at risk and trying to reduce that. So part of this is looking at how do we go about reducing risk from fire. That's kind of the first component. What can we do to manage? How do we reduce the frequency of fires? How do we reduce potential combustible materials from that? What are the mitigation measures that we can put in place? It's very much a parallel between both our cultural heritage fires and fires in natural heritage. Things are a little bit different, obviously, but the concepts are the same. Reduce ignition, reduce combustible materials, detect fire as early as possible, notify emergency responders, provide them with the equipment and resources that they need to have in place, and that they know and practice this in advance in order to try to reduce that. Once that has been developed, then we go into the preparedness phase, which is then waiting possibly for some potential event, but we already have the strategy in place and we're doing drills, we're doing training, we're creating awareness, we're continuing to engage with the emergency responders during this period. From there, should an event occur, then we're ready for action, both on site in terms of emergency response teams, as well as with local emergency responders. If we're potentially removing collections from buildings, we're ready to go, and there's a plan in place. It's not just starting right there and then at that moment, that there's plans and that it's well thought out, and that we're helping protect people. And the last part is in terms of recovery and building back better and just having plans in place. How do we stabilize things right after the event happens, whether it's the structure, whether it's wildland, so that we're not at fear of erosion and other increasing damage from other types of events like that. But having a plan, both short and long term, to start addressing that until we can start building back better. So those were the 4 things that I think having the overall fire risk management guide, which covers these as well too, but we need to look at integrating all of these together, is going to be very, very helpful in terms of making sure that we're successful in terms of going forward. So with that, just introducing you to the Fire Risk Management Guide briefly, which just came out a couple of days ago, and it's been fantastic to be working with UNESCO on this, and hopefully most of you have seen it and have had a chance to at least take an initial look. I won't go through this in a lot of detail, but how it's structured, basically to give you a rough idea, it's just we have an introduction that looks at what can be learned from previous fires and why things happen, again, to create the awareness, looking at common themes, looking at these fundamental findings of how do we make this relatively easily implementable, long-term sustainable and successful should there be a fire event. The first chapter looks at identifying fire risks and developing an overall fire risk management plan from a broad perspective. The second chapter then looks at how do we get into reducing risks, that first quadrant, in terms of prevention and mitigation plans. The third then talks about specifically the restoration and construction, because so many times, as we said, things happen during that period. We then have a whole chapter on wildfires, and again, looking at prevention, preparation, response, and recovery dedicated just to wildfires. And then the final is just looking on overall reflections, like how do we really make this long-term sustainable? How is it going to be easily implementable in terms of making it much more higher probability of having a success in terms of limiting the damage? So just hitting on a lot of key points there. And then at the end, we've incorporated a glossary and references to help with all of this. So with that pretty much concludes in terms of just a very broad overall perspective on what the fire risk management is. I think it's fantastic. I think it covers a very broad spectrum, both in terms of the technical part, but the overall, how do we go forward in implementing this and being successful? With that, I'd just like to thank a lot of people. A lot of the funders are here and acknowledged within the guide. I'm very thankful for them, the Heritage Emergency Fund under UNESCO, and within UNESCO, and many, many people within UNESCO that were also part of the development of this guide over the last few years. So with that, I will conclude my presentation, and looking forward to spending the rest of today and tomorrow, and hopefully most of you will be here the remaining 3 days. But I think it's absolutely fantastic that we're here and that this event is going on, that UNESCO has had the foresight to develop this guide and that it is being published. And I think I would enjoy any conversation. I think there's so much to be learned on so many different levels for all of us, and just love to hear what's happening and what the issues are, and how we go forward and trying to be as successful as we can from there. So with that, I will turn that back over. So thank you very much for the time to be with you here today. Thank you.